The institution of white-faced Christianity, which has poisoned the diaspora all the way to the United States, has been one of the most successful weapons of mass destruction that the white supremacy folks system, if you will, has put out there to keep black people unstable, unfocused, non-resistant to people that look more like the white Jesus mythology image, which is white folks. And it has been the biggest psychological trap that has captured us and has paralyzed our common sense.
It's evident that he cares. What do you care about? Welcome to the Rock Newman Show. It's the Rock Newman Show.
Good evening and welcome to another version of the Rock Newman Show 2.0. I'm honored to have you with us today, and I'm also honored to have someone, you guys are aware out here in YouTube land and beyond, that our original show stopped back in 2020. COVID shut the studio down, shut the university down where I was filming. And then I moved from Washington, D.C. to Boca Raton, Florida. So it's been a couple of years that we haven't done live shows, but now we are doing them. And in that 2-year period of time, my next guest received numerous texts from me to say, man, when I start my show, I find you to be one of the most interesting, fascinating, erudite gentlemen on the planet. And I want you to be on my show. He agreed to be with us tonight. It is Cleo Manago. Thank you for being on the Rock Newman Show 2.0.
It's good to see you. It's good to be back in your presence.
All
man.
right. Well, thank you so much. With Cleo Manago, and I invite you to look him up. Cleo Manago, M-A-N-G-O, right?
M-A-N-A-G-O.
M-A-N-A, Manago,
Yes.
Cleo Manago, look him up. So, and you'll see why I have such a difficult time of where to start with him, but I figure out where I want to start. So, my director, producer, all around just absolute brother, Avis J. Savista, is from Philadelphia. And he sent me a couple of articles recently. I shared them with someone else who's in the studio here with us, Kimon Freeman. We're in, by the way, the show is being brought to you from We Act Radio Studios, where I started the original Rock Newman Show. And I would like to thank Kimon Freeman and Alex Lawson, the founders and owners of We Act Radio. But I mentioned about Avis sending me articles, and he sent me articles about, one was these various, it must have been a photo of 20 or 30 grave sites that happened just recently in Philadelphia. And he sent me other articles about kids dying in the streets of Philadelphia. And it made me so acutely aware of the violence that is in Washington, D.C. I recently read for one of our shows an editorial in its entirety written by Colby King, editorial writer for the Washington Post. And he talked about being in church and how his how his priest would lead in prayer for the violence that is taking place in Washington, D.C., and the explosion of guns and the reckless abandonment of, call it what you will, morality, safety, regard for human life. And he recounted on a Sunday after church, there were 4 shootings. The following day, there were several. One of those who was shot died, and on. And he talked about the need to stem the tide and how we might stem the tide and the efforts required. And he talked about the necessity of building a family. So, Cleo, when I talk about this, and it's in our urban areas, this violence, this death, is in our urban areas. It is also beyond. If we can focus a bit, which I know that some of your work finds you doing, dealing with the maladies of our urban communities, if you could help us understand what is happening, why it's happening, and what we can do about it.
Okay, well, I'm going to attempt to do that by associating that phenomena with a test that you know about that I think is relevant, and that we haven't resolved that. We're dealing with the avalanche or the cumulative effect, and I'll be clear in a moment. Mm-hmm. In the 30s, there was a test called the doll test, which you've heard about.
The doll
test.
Doll test. Mm-hmm.
Where this black psychologist couple came up with the doll test, and they put a black doll that was essentially the same doll in terms of how it was designed, and a white doll, which was a pink doll. In terms of, they were both the same thing, except that one was brown and one was pink, so-called black and so-called white. They asked the children, black babies around 4 to 15 years old or so, to pick the doll that was the good doll and the bad doll. To make a long story short, the majority of the children chose the white doll as good, that's wonderful, having great attributes, very admirable. The black doll was chosen as bad, wrong. Some of them literally pushed, these are all black children, literally pushed the black doll away. Yeah. And then the interviewer was clear enough to ask the child, after they got finished demeaning the black child, which one is you? And in each instance, they were like, because they had already got finished defiling themselves and saying they were bad compared to the white doll, but they did not want to choose that black doll. And they went into what I call the post-white supremacy trauma trance.
What is it? Post-what?
The post-white supremacy anti-black trauma trance. Mm-hmm. We are in that trance deeply right now. And the reason that we're still in it, because we haven't resolved it. Let's go from the 30s to 2021. A professor in Texas, I forget her name right now, redid the test. And there's been several people who have redone the doll test since then.
Yes.
And matter of fact, what's his name? The guy with the white hair on CNN. What's his name? Anderson Cooper.
Oh, Anderson Cooper.
Anderson Cooper also sponsored the test being done during the Obama administration to see what difference that would make that we had Michelle and Obama in the White House. To make a long story long, the black children are still choosing the white doll. And they're still saying the black doll or the dark doll is bad. Now, how that's relevant to what you're saying is that the point I'm making is that from the 1930s to now, that has not changed. Nothing changes until the conditions change. The conditions that we live in that we keep mistaken for successes when an individual like an Oprah or Kamala or Obama or these individuals who are not necessarily a response to collective change, but individual token appointments, we keep mistaking those superficial symbolic events for full change, and it's not.
For progress.
The implication that being black is inferior, the N-word, which is in great use more than ever before, and we talk about hair, which we talk about in a moment, but all these things that imply that being black is bad on a systemic basis have not been resolved. And what ties it in a bow is the N-word. It re-implies the relative lower level of human worth and value in black people. And then when you see the police brutality, when I do my talks, I always ask the audience, which is usually black, come up with a pop culture love story between two black people that's not a comedy that you can reliably turn your TV on, particularly on the popular stages, and find. And what they find is they can't find it. There's still very few situations where black people are fully humanized, are fully seen as lovable, worth saving. And now what they're doing, and everybody can see this, even Stevie Wonder can see this, they're pushing black people almost nonstop to look at people outside of black people as life partners. It's hard to find a black on black couple in corporate advertisement, most TV commercials. All these things reinforce the myth of black people not being that valuable.
Just when you mentioned that it's difficult to find a black couple, were you talking about a couple that portrays heterosexuality, or
across the board? I mean, it's hard to find, since you bring up sexuality specifics, I was referring to what's typically in the media, which is heterosexuality. Mm-hmm. And when you talk about a man and a woman, they usually are, now this is a comedy, I want to be real clear. Mm-hmm. Blackish is a comedy, so people try to have that as a saving grace when I come up with these examples. But other than a comedy, it's hard to find a reliable, everyday story that's full of delicious, thirsty love between two black people. You can find it between two white people, and you can find it between a black person and a white person, but not between two black people. Mm-hmm. So we have, in short, are still being born and raised into a society where we are not given a critical analysis about the fact that there's this corruption called white supremacy mythology that is everywhere. For example, there were some children that were in Sesame Street. There's some children who are at some place called Legoland. I don't know if you've heard of Legoland, where it's like Disneyland, but it's the Lego products. And they had on camera these two adorable baby black children who were waiting for the Lego caricatures to come play with them like they were all the other kids, and they never came. Yeah. And instead of the parent educating the child about, look, there's a corruption in this society called racism, white supremacy. It's wrong, it's problematic, it's twisted. It's problematic, not you. Yeah. But it is. Yeah. For example, and I just did a talk the other day, I've been doing it for years, and the same thing occurs. I asked the audience, packed full of black folks, have you ever had a sit down with a guardian who broke down the problem of white supremacy mythology? I call it a myth because white superiority is a myth, so I call it mythology. Yeah. Had ever sit down with you and give you a comprehensive discussion on the problem of white supremacy and racism, how it works, and so you could have a working knowledge of it? And most of them said no. What they did hear a lot was, you got to work twice as good as a white man. You've heard that before, right?
Oh, many times.
And that's a well-intended problematic mantra, because without the whole story, it implies that because your type is twice as bad, you got to work twice as hard to make up for being black. That's the implication. Yeah. If they don't do this is what they should be doing. They should be telling their children, baby, I love you. You're wonderful. You're valuable. You're beautiful. And this is a society where you might have to work twice as hard because of a corruption, a problem in this society that causes police brutality, racial profiling, all kinds of things. They got a problem, not you, baby. It's not you. Yeah. And then after you get finished making it clear that it's not them, don't ever call them the N-word, don't ever say sit your black ass down, don't ever objectify them and racialize them. Because throughout my career in mental health, I used to work with dual diagnosed abused children in Echo Park at Gateway's Mental Health Center in Los Angeles. And to make that long story short, the majority of the children there have been abused. That's why they were there. That's why they were on the unit. Yeah. And they were Jewish, white, black. The only children who found some themselves critical analysis about the whole situation was the black people. This is what N-words do. This is what they, and none of the other kids who had gone through the same experience ever racialized their trauma and their abuse. And that came from being objectified and racialized and becoming something less than human during slavery that we've inherited. And we have not done the work to resolve that and deflect that phenomenon. So our children are still choosing the white doll. We're still calling ourselves N-words and coming up with excuses to why I take the A, I call it A and E, all these crazy things instead of just getting rid of it, which is what people who respect themselves would do. So that's all that is kind of some of the answers. Then you have people who are in question about their value, your value and my value as two black people, a gun. Oh, bam, bam.
Yeah.
Because neither one of us are worth a damn.
Yeah.
So I don't care if you're dead, and I don't care if I'm dead. They're not gonna go and shoot anything that looks like the white dog generally, and like Jesus, which is a myth, like Santa Claus.
Yeah.
But we don't know that, so we are shooting at each other based on the myth of black people having lesser value than anybody else. Because N-words ain't S. You know what I mean by S? I can't cuss in the show, right?
Go ahead.
You've heard that line, niggas ain't shit.
Yeah. Niggas and flies, I do despise. The more I see niggas, the better I like flies.
There is no equivalent.
People know that damn phrase.
Look, I just spoke to an audience just last week, a large audience, and they all knew that phrase. And I had to let them know there's no equivalent phrase. You're not going to hear no Latinos with a song on the radio saying, I'm living my best life. I'm not going back and forth with those wetbacks. You're not going to hear it. Right. And I got to say this because I said that, is that it's not because we're deficient or something's wrong with us.
Yeah.
It's because we have been displaced and traumatized, and we've become ambitiously involved in survival and assimilation and doing well in the devil's arms instead of deflecting the devil's arms.
So let me take the risk for a whole lot of people to call me a whole bunch of names for asking the question, and maybe calling you a whole bunch of names, all depending on how you answer the question.
Okay.
I just saw, I think it was on TikTok, in a most sincere and somber manner as possible, Deion Sanders was talking about the one thing that was consistent, that he always counted on when he couldn't count on people, places, things, money, or anything else. What sustained his life and nourished him and lifted him and elevated him and that made him never be depressed, he said, was Jesus. So I want you to respond to that. And I want you to respond to all that you just talked about as being problematic, seriously problematic, and having created all the trauma in the black community and in the black experience. I want you to respond to what Deion said, and I think he was being sincere. He looked like he was being sincere.
I believe he was.
To respond to what Deion said, and then, if you would, talk about the impact of religion on those maladies that afflict the black community.
This is all your fault. The institution of white-faced Christianity, which has poisoned the diaspora all the way to the United States, has been one of the most successful weapons of mass destruction that the white supremacy folks system, if you will, has put out there to keep black people unstable, unfocused, non-resistant to people that look more like the white Jesus mythology image, which is white folks. And it has been the biggest psychological trap that has captured us and has paralyzed our common sense.
I'm going to ask you, as best you can, try to say that again.
The institution of white-faced Christianity starring a pretend fake Jesus Christ, who was based off a Michelangelo family member, has been one of the most effective weapons of mass destruction to cause the paralysis of common sense and even self-preservation among people of African descent. Now I want to get into Deion Sanders. First of all, being a human being in this society creates all kinds of possibilities, all kinds of human behavior, all kinds of things that occur. And one of the things that white supremacy mythology and all its iterations does is it gets in the way of, like I said before, common sense, critical thinking, and collective analysis. And what I mean by collective analysis is that there's some people in our community who, through sports, through TV, through some things, art, music, if you will, who have, quote, made it and become superstars. However, almost none of them are talking about Black power and Black people coming together. And that would be God's work, if you will, if they really were working and operating on behalf of God. God, in my opinion, is God helps those who help themselves. And I can get into that philosophy in a moment, but I want to talk about Deion Sanders and what I call the placebo syndrome. You've heard of women who weren't pregnant, who psychosomatically believed they were, and started having the symptoms of pregnancy.
Yes.
That was the placebo effect of that strong will and desire for that to be the case. My grandmother, who used to be the mother of a church, up until she finally woke up, was one of those people that blamed everything on Jesus and the Lord. If something went well in her life, thank God. She almost never thought herself or even thought of her own self as someone with ingenuity and brilliance and the capacity to get things. Then it was always white Jesus and everything. Well, my point is that perspective can have a placebo effect, and you can have some things occur in your life that are quote unquote positive, like what Deion Sanders believes, and there's some things that can occur in their lives that might look like God. However, the contradiction is this: if they actually come out of the placebo effect and out of that trance and look at reality, is that why is Deion Sanders the exception and not the rule? You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Why is his life and the circumstances based on sports, mind you, the exception and not the rule? Because it has nothing to do with God. In the religious sense, it has to do with the fact that he's a good athlete and he was in the right place at the right time, because there's a lot of other good athletes that don't get where he is, and they're no less important to God than he is. They're no more, he's not no religious deity that makes water into wine. He's a human being who's a good athlete who got a gig and it's worked well for him. But we're trained to think that when things go well for us, that we have favor with God, which is kind of ridiculous, because why would you have favor with God and nobody else just because you play basketball?
So that makes me think about the times, and it could be basketball, football, or baseball. I don't see it too much in hockey, but
You know why?
but when you're at that plate, man, and you hit that home run, and you run around the bases, and you point up, and we know what that means. That's thanking the deity.
That's right.
And in many cases, probably thanking Jesus.
Yeah.
But when you strike out, I don't see anybody.
But see, that's what I mean by, and I'm probably rephrasing it different than what I said before, but see, there's no logic in this. There is emotionality in this, tradition in this. We live in it right now in post-slavery, post-inhumanity, post-chattel slavery reality, with no time being set down to unpack, heal, and repair from that experience. What we've done and learned how to master is covering up with clothes, with hair, with material things that we can afford it, and our worth becoming based on how well we superficially present ourselves, which has nothing to do with God. It has to do with the success of capitalism on your psyche and them pimping you into buying their products, and you thinking that you can't live without their products. This don't got nothing to do with God. Now, I'm not an atheist. I got to say that right now, because people hear me talk, and people have told me in my face, "You're an atheist. You said you're an atheist." No, I am not an atheist. There's no way I could be an atheist. My life is so full of the absolute fact that there's spirituality, and cause and effect in terms of having a cohesive relationship with spiritual matter that I have in my life, that no way am I an atheist. But I don't let King James run my life. And I'm not letting no white supremacists or no white imagery or no kind of white frame of reference run nothing over here. And when people like Sanders and other people like doing all of this, it's typically a white God. It's typically a white Jesus, because that's what slavery taught us. Slavery literally sterilized us out of African sensibilities into becoming white supremacist puppets. And that's what most of us are.
Cleo, you, I think in the past, I haven't seen much of late, but you talked about this American society. I don't know if you broadened it beyond America, but this USA society having a strong role in feminizing black boys and black men. I've heard you talk about that. I've heard you mention that you had a personal choice of same gender affection, same gender love.
I had a personal choice in what regard?
For yourself.
Personal choice in what regard?
In
terms of how I refer to myself?
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yes.
And that is, and how is that?
As a same gender loving black man.
Okay. And so, do you feel, so one, do I have it right in that you're saying that this society, culturally and otherwise, is feminizing black boys and men?
No, I'm talking about getting somebody in trouble.
Okay.
But let me tell you what I actually said, y'all who's listening. Let me preface whatever I'm going to say with, I know for a fact, having traveled the world, having traveled throughout the diaspora, and just got back a few weeks ago from Nigeria, and having been on the continent many, many times, is that, and studied human behavior and sexuality, and having eyes at work and having 20/20 vision, that femininity and masculinity, particularly in the Western world, are control constructs to determine how people perform. There is such thing as a male child who is so-called feminine. And I say so-called feminine because the reason why we're so busy getting caught up in these hard decisions around what's masculine and feminine is because of the influence of the Victorian era, and where the chastity belts and a lot of oppression around sexuality and gender expression occurred. We inherited that. The people that built this country built it off of, among other things, the King James religious map, which was very sexually oppressive and had all kinds of places where people should be based on who they were. And they were against homosexuality and men being feminine and women being masculine. However, in the natural world, in lots of parts of indigenous Africa, there is that those constructs of what masculine and feminine are not as pronounced. For example, have you been to the continent?
Yes.
Have you seen all over the place men holding hands walking down the street?
Yes.
Men with their arms around each other?
Yeah.
Men literally sitting in each other's laps in public places? Men kissing each other? Now that does not necessarily mean that there's a sexual situation going on or not. Sometimes there is, and that's a whole other story. My point is that in this country, people are not going to do that. As a matter of fact, in parts of Africa like Ghana, where hip hop culture, which is very what I call compensatory masculine or exaggerated masculine, that's developed around being man enough in a society that castrates you. A lot of African people have seen hip hop culture and they don't touch anymore. I'm talking about men. They don't hug each other as much anymore. They don't hold hands publicly as much anymore because they've learned to become self-conscious about it based on the industrial strength masculine drag of American hip hop. So I have to contextualize that.
Industrial strength.
Masculine drag. You're
Masculine
in a
drag.
drag show, right? Did you see a woman, a guy dressed like a woman?
Sure.
Well, there's men dressing up like men too.
Yeah.
It's all an act.
Yeah.
They didn't come out the womb talking hard and yos up
Right.
and I ain't going out like that
Yeah.
and being hyper concerned about not being man enough.
Uh-huh.
But all that concern about not being man enough in this society among black men is a consequence of hundreds of years of not having the opportunity to be men in a patriarchal society that glorified manhood but wouldn't allow black men to control their sex life, control how many children they had, control keeping their children, control nothing. And again, like I said about the earlier topic, we have not sat down to unpack, to repair, to review, and learn to become functional people of African descent. We still choosing the white dog and all kinds of stuff or something. But before I lose you, getting back to your question about masculine and femininity, while we have dysfunctions and exaggerations and survival tactics around being feminine enough and masculine enough, and while there's a natural world that creates men and women that express themselves across a spectrum of so-called femininity and masculinity, this is a society that prefers black men who are not a threat,
Yes.
who are not strong, who are not stepping up like Malcolm did, and who are not as black affirming and fighting for black people in the way that James Baldwin did.
Yeah.
James Baldwin was an effeminate man who crossed his legs, but he was a brilliant black freedom fighter, unlike Bayard Rustin, who you might have heard of, who was not the same kind of person, who was treated differently by the black community because a lot of his work wasn't black affirming.
Yeah.
But Bayard Rustin was. Excuse me, I'm sorry, James Baldwin, not Bayard Rustin.
Yeah.
James Baldwin was. So we've always been a community that showed up in different ways. And if you were about your people, about black people, we didn't really trip that much off of whether you were like James Baldwin or like Malcolm X. However, again, we are a community, I would say that we're in process, but process is the wrong word because process implies a forward movement. We are paralyzed by trauma. And in this instance, trauma around masculinity and femininity. And there's a larger society called the United States that is glorifying being a feminine male. That's glorifying being something other than strong, in quotes, and masculine, in quotes, when you're a black male, and uplifting other variances of being a male in this society. And they prefer the man who doesn't show up like a warrior.
Cleo, in terms you study people. you're very modest, and you don't go by labels, but you're a doctor, and you study people, and in studying people, you study history.
Yes.
And while we're just on this subject here, something that more recently come to my attention. You know, we often talk about our black women having been the subject to the slave master's whims, to his sexual whims.
That's right.
And we don't hear much at all about black men who were subject to the slave master's sexual whims, and how often black men were raped during those times where they had zero power.
And even now, if you bring in Richard Dominique, Ed Buck, and Jeffrey Dahmer, who are the more known violators and rapers of black men that have made popular culture, even though Richard Dominique is not that well known, but he killed more people than Jeffrey Dahmer, more black men than Jeffrey Dahmer did out of Louisiana. But it gets back to what I call the black male resurrection campaign. And what I mean by that is that this society has glorified a toxic version of patriarchy that has been the only frame of reference that all of us have had, including black men, in terms of how to be a man. And black men have not been allowed to replicate that for several hundred years in this country and being totally out of control of our own lives. So as a result of that, we have not been one to talk about any kind of rape, feminization, or sexualization, homosexual for that matter, among black men, because that would be admittance to the most ultimate violation or interruption of black manhood, and we too busy trying to resurrect manhood to be acknowledging that. I'll give you a short story that I can be long, it'll be short, I promise. But at the first Million Man March, you probably were there, but I was there.
I was.
And there was a point in time, no one was on the stage, and crying, remember the crying and moaning started. Brothers were crying of all walks of life, of all ages, were leaning on each other in tears because we have a gaping wound that we have not been encouraged to address and resolve. We putting on these clothes this man drag, and if we can handle it, some black men resist the whole thing. But we put on this performance so not to show our pain. And one of the things that bothered me about the Man March, it was wonderful, etc., but there was no acknowledgement of those tears. When Farrakhan got up there and whoever got up there, while the moaning and crying was occurring in the millions all around us, there was no acknowledgement of those tears. And even when the nation, who I have respect for, but they're not perfect, and they are definitely involved in what I call the Black Male Resurrection Campaign, when they put out their images from the march, they didn't show any of those images of us crying. But we were crying in droves.
Yeah.
My point in bringing that up is that in a male-driven, hyper-patriarchal society where black men are trying to retroactively replicate the manhood construct that's all they know, faggot, bitch, punk, and sissy don't fit into that paradigm.
Yeah.
And that's been a problem. I'm using those names because that's how people have been referenced, but it's been a problem to not acknowledge same-gender loving people, because one of the consequences of that has been to find some type of sanctuary or support. Some have been going into the white gay community, regardless of its racism. That's how they wound up at Ed Buck's house. That's how they wound up at Jeffrey Dahmer's house. That's how they wound up in the arms of Richard Dominique, because they didn't have demonstrative, clear support for who they are in a black community context. And what's been happening also, which has been interesting, is that you have feminine men black men, who have felt unseen, who the white gay community has given permission to come out and be flamboyant and be who they are. But what's missing from that reaction is a critical analysis of why black people are resistant to that. There's some reasons that I just broke down in terms of this patriarchal stuff, this manhood interruption stuff, this retroactive attempt to reclaim manhood in dysfunctional ways, because the toxic patriarchy that runs this country from the very beginning was dysfunctional. Women didn't get a chance to vote until 5 minutes ago, because of the patriarchy. But it's all we know. Just like English is all most of us know, and the N-word is part of that lexicon, so we use it all day long, even though it does injury to us. So you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I hear you. And it makes me ask you this. I mean, it creates a vision. So I see this, what looks like to be about a 6'4", 6'5" guy getting out of, kind of a limousine I said guy, person, getting out of, I don't know what to call people anymore. But so getting out of a SUV type limousine, and you can see that it's got very expensive shoes and expensive wear and Louis Vuitton bags, or whatever the popular names are, and the person is strapping, and it's Magic Johnson's son, who dresses very femininely. Is that healthy, unhealthy, or we should get out of that business?
I'm sighing because, Rock.
Is that liberating? Well, I don't know what that is.
I'm going to try.
I'm asking you, the expert.
I'm going to try to answer that as quickly. I know I talk a lot.
No, but it's all right.
But you and I are wearing pants and in so-called male clothing based on the current era that has decided what male clothing is.
Okay.
There was a time where people like you and I literally wore gowns.
Okay.
Even the pictures of fake Jesus, they typically have on a gown because of the era in which they allegedly lived. Mm-hmm. So whatever Magic Johnson's son is wearing, it's being called feminine, but you had a guest that I saw on recently on your show who talked about the mascara that that men wore in the desert.
Yeah, in Egypt. Yeah.
And there's the Watusi, and there's people on the continent who wear makeup that put most drag queens to shame in terms of how much they wear to become alluring to whoever they're interested in, and there's not necessarily homosexuality involved at all. Uh-huh. So my point to you is that these are constructs.
Okay.
And there's constructs that you're familiar with, there's constructs I'm familiar with, that we were not taught was a construct. We were taught boys get blue, girls get pink, and that's the way, the implications that some benevolent force, probably white Jesus, but some benevolent force, said this is so.
There are a whole bunch of people out there right now that say, black man, you better leave my white Jesus alone.
Yeah, bless their hearts. I help you get out that trance. But anyway, so my point to you is that we're reacting to Magic Johnson's son's persons, I think they identify as, I heard them identify as male with their own mouth, so I get to say male. We are reacting to Magic Johnson's son's clothing because of how we've been trained that men should dress, not because of some organic, natural, or unnatural impulse. He can afford to be free, and he's free, and he's not interested in putting on man drag. Or the industrial strength male performance is not interesting to him. He wants to have more fluidity and more flow for who he is, and I have no problem with that. But nothing is clean in the society in terms of that. We have not developed a critical perspective of that. We have, particularly in the black community, who's man hungry, masculinity hungry, because of what we've been through. We look at that as a compromised black male. As a feminized black male. Have you ever heard of Sir Lady Java?
Yes.
Okay, good. See, it's good to talk to somebody who's close in age. We go, what? Well, Sir Lady Java, as you know, was what we call now, but we didn't call them that then, a transgender person who spent their whole life, who were born male but became female, and was literally on the front of parades in the Martin Luther King Jr. Parade in Los Angeles as one of the what do you call them? Well, anyway, they were in the parade. Okay. So, and there's also a film that you may have remembered that starred Pearl Bailey and Red Fox in the late '70s called Norman, Is That You? Remember that?
Yes.
Norman, That You is a story, a black story about two black people who had a same-gender loving son, and they didn't know what to make of it, so they said Norman, Is That You, being a same-gender loving person. But we have not, because of the male defensiveness, sat down and had a conversation about our diversity. So we're still tripping off of Magic Johnson's son. And there's another issue, which is not necessarily related to Magic Johnson's son, but related to how some of us react to homosexuality, particularly among men, is that there's been rape. I mean, you kind of brought this up when you talk about rape during slavery, but I'm talking about sexual misconduct or sexual abuse inside of a black community context that's homosexual, if you will, that is not talked about. And some of these industrial strength, hardcore anti-homosexual people that some who you know of, who I won't name right now, who constantly talk about it, have been either raped or they're struggling with their sexuality. And they're concerned about their manhood. One of the reasons why some same-gender loving black men don't come out, because they do not want their manhood to be questioned. Because their manhood or their perfection of that performance, in some cases, is all they have. And you're going to take it away by calling them a faggot? I'm not saying nothing.
Yeah.
And these men play basketball. They run for president. They are.
Don't say one of them won the presidency.
I didn't say one out loud. I didn't say that. But as a same-gender loving person who's been in direct contact with a lot of, even including famous people who want counsel from me, who are same-gender loving. Some of them are sex symbols, and they loved, and they show up with a woman all the time, and women fall all out, and they're not even remotely interested. But people don't know that because they don't want their manhood pedestal to be snatched from under them.
Damn. So I have a lot of single friend girls. I don't say girlfriends because I don't want that to be a mistake. But friend girls who lament they just can't get a man. They just can't get a man. And they run the spectrum from being, from being people that folks would look at and say, oh, well, maybe she wouldn't get a man, to ones who you would look at and be like, boy, I know she ain't got no problem getting a man, but they can't get a man. They point to, if they're on a certain level of success, they point to the economic issue. They point to prison, and they point to rampant homosexuality.
Right. Now, of course, I've heard all of that.
Okay.
Well, you really hitting hard today, Mr. Newman. I'm going to, at the risk of being controversial, I'm going to use a famous black woman to make a point. Her name is Serena Williams. There's a documentary that I'm not sure is still in circulation that was on HBO. This is before she got married to the white guy.
I don't know what documentary you're talking about, but I can't wait until you finish this story right here. Because you started with Serena Williams.
In this documentary that was about Serena Williams, that was on HBO, there's a scene in it where she's playing tennis with her coach, who's a white man.
Right.
And somehow she gets on the subject of relationships, and she says to him, nah, I mean, I could never do pink. I could never be with no white man. And I'm paraphrasing, but that's the bottom line in terms of what she meant. And of course, I was excited about that because I appreciate high-profile black-on-black love. Because even though Samuel Jackson loves a sister, Denzel Washington loves a sister, the woman who played in Scandal, I forget her name, Kerry Washington, loves her brother. You never, and Beyonce and Jay-Z are a black couple. You almost never see them in a magnified way as part of the landscape, because white supremacy don't like that. They want us to run into them and not valuing each other. So you almost never see it. Like you might hear about a Brangelina, but you're not going to hear about a Jayance. Because they are purposely deflecting that from our consciousness so we can keep choosing the white dog.
I swear I'm going to do a show. I am going to do a show, and I was going to talk about it with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. We had him in the studio, and the damn power went out. But I was going to ask him about Sidney Poitier, Harry Belafonte, him, and so many other very high-profile black men, and all of the ones I was going to name, they all parade around with a white girlfriend or a white wife. But let you finish the Serena Williams piece.
Anyway, I was glad to see that you didn't provoke me with that because I have a lot to say about that. But some of it I can morph into this. I was excited to hear that because at the time, Serena was Serena.
Yeah.
And we never have, or I shouldn't say we rarely have somebody on that scale who was saying they love somebody black. The last person to kind of do it was this young man who played in Star Trek. I forgot his name, but it's some young brother actor from England who said sisters only. I forgot his name. I'm sorry, because I know I was going to be discussing him. But he was in the Star Trek series recently, and he just made he's also in Woman King. He's one of the stars of Woman King. In case people want to look him up. Anyway, this is the issue about these sisters that I'm going to raise here, and that I think happened with Serena, because she was dating Common and some other black people. The unresolved residue of logic displacement and behavior disorientation, or LDBD, that occurs among black people, unresolved, can have some really damaging effects and can impact how we are with each other. If a black woman is traumatized about racism, white supremacy, and has been trained to practice misandry, which is being anti-black male in this society, or misandrinor, as they call it, to put the black on it, and are distrusting of black men, or have some unconscious uncertainty about the value of black men, they'll be with a black man and they can't even be there clean, just at face value. They're thinking, they're analyzing, they're judging, and they're not even articulating all this to the brother, so he can't even defend himself or get rid of their blinders by giving them some clarity on who they are. They're doing all this stuff in their head. Now, one of the side effects of the trauma trance is that a lot of what occurs in the mind is unconscious. We don't even know what's going on. So Serena, based on my view of her for many years, does not have the capacity, including based on some of her father's behavior, to look at a black man with a clean slate. There's all this baggage that white men don't have to deal with when they sit in front of her. And this is all unconscious. And a lot of the perspectives of black men that come out of society that is a result of misdirected rage from black men, which is a side effect of racism as well, which is some of this death that we talked about earlier is a lethal version of. We're not really having fully present conversations with each other. We're in the trauma trance, which is designed for us to short circuit the idea of simply valuing each other. We find excuses. Well, he didn't doing this, and his shoes, and oh my God, this is what we do to black people, not to white people, not to the people that look like the fake Jesus. So when these sisters, in my opinion, sit down with these brothers, particularly they quote unquote made it, And often making it means you have successfully replicated what mostly white people do and get paid for it.
Yeah.
You have not successfully built black community. You have not successfully risen black people up into self-love and independence and autonomy. You have made money, which we value in society more than we value black people. So some of these sisters, in my opinion, are overjudging, unconsciously dehumanizing, and sending black men through an unconscious gauntlet that makes him lose every time.
Wow.
And they wind up being by themselves.
Yeah.
And when when an Asian or a white man comes who should get all the baggage that's out there because people look like them done all the damage. They should be doing all this kind of stuff. But he looks more like white Jesus. And he ain't an N-word. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, I do.
He's not being referenced at all as an N-word.
And how in the hell do we break that cycle?
Well, this is when I get excited, right? It's easy. Well, that's the wrong way of putting it. Let me not say it's easy. It's all resolvable. Okay. I have been very fortunate enough in my work because of a methodology I developed called critical thinking and cultural affirmation, or CTCA.
Critical
thinking and cultural affirmation.
Cultural affirmation.
For example, if someone is in a trance and you give them good advice, I'll use domestic violence for an example. You have met in your lifetime intellectually brilliant women, and probably some men too, I know I have, who will go home to violence and domestic violence, and you know they have great intellectual capacity.
Yeah.
Attorneys, all kinds of people that go, and you go,
why you stay?
Why you stay?
Yeah.
Well, that's because that pimp has successfully embarked into their consciousness their lack of value without them. Mm-hmm. And white supremacy has made us think that their water is wetter, their fire is hotter. So we can't imagine
ice colder. Yeah,
right, we can't imagine life without that domestic violator. So we constantly go back to get a black eye or a white eye, really, and we stand in this domestic violence relationship with white supremacy and like a person who's brilliant. So what I do in my work is I break the trauma trance, the kind of trauma trance that'll let you stay in a relationship that's violating you, or society that's violating that you try to replicate. You mentioned some people who are married to white people, and I'm gonna just say this, and I'm gonna get to my point. There's a difference between fighting for the right to access whiteness, including their women, and fighting against racism for white access and fighting against racism for black power. Mm-hmm. The people who are fighting against racism for black power will not be with nobody white. Mm-hmm. But the people who are fighting against racism because they resent the barrier to their capacity to join in, on the outside it looks the same. We're both fighting against racism. Yeah. But there's a difference between Bayard Rustin and James Baldwin. And I think I made my point. Mm-hmm. So the bottom line is these people in my work, I can't give names, but I have been lucky enough to work with people who are in the anti-black trauma trance, who talked about black asses, who were racializing black people, who were traumatized, and taught them through a process to come out of that trance. And once they come out of that trance, we can do the cultural affirmation work. We can do the restoration, rebuilding, and common sense development work. Mm-hmm. But if I give somebody good advice, like stay away from that man, and they're in the trance, they're not going to listen to nothing that you say because they're in the trauma trance. Yeah. But once the trauma trance is broken, that's the key, Rock Newman. Once the trauma trance is broken, which it can be broken because its capacity broken is it's dormant under the minds of all black people. When that trance is broken and we get restored with cultural affirmation, then that's a helpful process to get us to change from white supremacist codependence to people who affirm and love being black.
So, Cleo, we can go on, and Lord knows I'm going to want you to come back to Rock Newman Show.
I'll be glad to come back.
2.0, time and time again. Now, you just turned the corner in explaining what you just explained about the trauma trance and the cultural affirmation. Because I was going to ask you, given this state of gloom, there's a pall of gloom, man, in so many aspects of our society. Part of my recent time in D.C., I was a part of Howard University's homecoming, and I felt it felt like black love all over the place. And that was just so affirming. That was so very lifting. And, you know, I go back to the hotel and pick up the paper, turn on the news, and you continue to see, you know, the reality of people dying at the hands of whether it is the government apparatus or whether it is of 14-year-olds who can get a gun very readily. And God damn it, we don't manufacture guns.
That's right.
You know, but nevertheless, those guns are killing other people in our community. So there's a pall, there's a sadness there. So what I was going to maybe try to wrap this piece up with was, are you hopeful?
Very hopeful.
Tell me why.
It goes back to what I was saying earlier. I have been involved in work that is trance breaking. When a black child, as going back to how I started this interview in the very beginning, up until 2022, is picking the white doll over their magnificence, over their beauty, over their history, over what being the first human beings on planet, being a masterful, magnificent part of the human family, and we're here first, and it's easy to prove, picks the white doll over themselves.
Yeah.
That's the trauma trance.
Yeah.
And as I said earlier, going from the 30s to now, the trauma trance has not been broken because we've been trying to survive and assimilate. And white supremacy has been working it by making a token named Oprah, token here, token there, token everywhere. And that implies in our desperate minds that we have progressed when they're getting paid, which is not the same thing as us progressing. They've been using all of these strategies to keep us hopeful in a trance, but the trance can be broken. And until we become intentional guardians, intentional parents, and stop calling our children black and sitting their black asses down and racializing them and saying crazy stuff like niggas ain't shit, and sit your black ass down and all this racialization of a human group called black now, if we stop all of that, everything else is going to work out. If we do the trance breaking work, and as I said earlier, introduce the facts of black brilliance, wonderful complexity, and success in the black psyche when they're outside of the trance. See, if you talk all this stuff about Black History Month while we're in a trance, it eventually rolls off the back. Mm-hmm. But when the trance is broken and you're fully awake and you get good information and guidance, that information has more of an impact. So I am connected to a methodology that I've seen. I have met, and we don't got enough time to get into it, but I've met black men and women who wouldn't touch a black man with a 10-foot pole or a black woman with a 10-foot pole, who are all over that pole, so to speak. Yeah. Now. Yeah. And I didn't teach them to hate nobody. I want to be clear, because a lot of us think that pro-black means anti-white, and the opposite of pro-black is anti-black. White people are not in the equation, but we put them in the equation to protect them because that's what we've been trained to do. But I have not told them to hate white people or nobody to hate white people. I told them to love themselves, and I got proof of why you should. I also know why you don't, and we're going to break that down together. Once you come out of the trance, you can hear me clearly, and your behavior will change. I've done that work, so I am very hopeful, but I'm only one person.
I can't tell you, man, how thrilled I am that you were available to do this show tonight. What I can tell you is when you run for president.
Oh, I'm not gonna do that.
I'm gonna vote for your black ass.
My black ass.
I can tell you that. Thanks for joining me, man. And I look forward to getting you back to the table again.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I'm glad you're back. It's wonderful to see you. You're one of the best interviewers I've ever met, and I've been interviewed by a lot of people. So it's my pleasure to be here.
When you run for president, I'm voting for your black ass. Folks, thank you for joining us today. This is another version of the Rock Newman Show. And until the next time, we're going to go in peace and love. And that would be affirming black love.
That's right.
We are one. We're done. We're done.